The first complaint arrived on a Tuesday morning. Folded neatly in a bright red envelope stamped Urgent HOA Notice. The letter accused me of violating neighborhood appearance standards, specifically that my newly built wooden fence extended 6 inches beyond acceptable boundary limits. It was signed in thick blue ink by none other than the self-appointed neighborhood watchdog, Karen Aldridge, president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. Until that morning, I had lived peacefully on my half-acre lot, tucked at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. My property bordered Karen's, a sprawling 2-story colonial painted a blinding shade of white with perfectly symmetrical hedges and a backyard pool that seemed to host every neighborhood gathering. I had never attended one, mostly because Karen's invitations were more like summonses. If you didn't show up, your absence was noted, discussed, and gossiped about for weeks. My fence had gone up just 3 weeks earlier. Simple, functional, and built to keep my dogs safely inside the yard, it matched dozens of others in the community. The only difference was that mine was straighter, professionally measured, and built exactly along the property line. Or so I thought. Karen's letter, however, claimed otherwise. According to her, the fence encroached onto community property and diminished the visual symmetry of the neighborhood. She demanded immediate removal, or further action would be taken. I read those words 3 times, my irritation growing with each pass. I wasn't surprised, though. Karen had always found reasons to meddle, whether it was someone's lawn being too long or a mailbox being the wrong shade of bronze. That afternoon, she came marching over, clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched like armor. I watched from the porch as she measured my fence with a small tape measure, muttering to herself as though the wood panels had personally insulted her. Then she snapped several photos, no doubt destined for her growing archive of violations. I could almost hear her rehearsing her speech for the next HOA meeting. For a few days, I ignored the matter. The fence wasn't hurting anyone, and I had permits approved by the county, not just HOA guidelines. But Karen didn't stop. 2 more letters followed, each one more aggressive than the last. One threatened daily fines, another mentioned possible legal recourse. When I tried to reason with the HOA office, I discovered she practically was the HOA. The vice president was her cousin, the secretary her best friend, and the treasurer her husband. Soon, whispers began to spread through Willow Creek. Some neighbors offered polite sympathy, others avoided eye contact. It was the kind of small-town pressure Karen thrived on, quiet compliance through discomfort. She didn't just enforce the rules, she created them. And she had decided I was the next example to make. By the 2nd week, I received notice of an official HOA inspection. Karen, wearing her trademark red blazer, showed up with 2 board members and a county representative. They marched through my yard, pointing, writing, and snapping photos like they were investigating a crime scene. I stood on the porch again, silent, watching the spectacle unfold. I had nothing to hide, but their smug confidence made my stomach churn. When they left, Karen smirked and said something about corrective action. That was the moment I decided I wasn't going to play her game anymore. That night, I went through my property documents, the original deed, the plat maps, and the survey that had come with the home. Everything appeared in order. My fence line matched the one marked on record. Still, something about Karen's certainty nagged at me. Either she was bluffing, or she knew something I didn't. So I called a professional surveyor, someone independent of the HOA and the county office. A few days later, a man named Reed showed up with his equipment, a GPS rig, measuring rods, and quiet efficiency. He spent most of the day walking the perimeter, marking points, and checking coordinates. Karen watched from her backyard the entire time, arms crossed, eyes narrowed like a hawk. When Reed finished, he told me he'd send a full report within 48 hours. But before he left, he gave me a curious look and said, "Something's off here." Then he gestured toward Karen's property. "That pool of hers, it might not be where she thinks it is." I didn't understand what he meant at first. Her pool? The large in-ground one surrounded by stone pavers, cabana chairs, and a built-in grill? It had been there for years, long before I'd moved in. But Reed's tone carried weight, enough to make my pulse quicken. For the next 2 days, I barely slept. When the survey arrived in my inbox, I opened it immediately. There, highlighted in yellow, was a bold boundary line, and sure enough, Karen's pool sat entirely over it. Nearly a third of her backyard, deck, pump system, and pool, was built on my property. I reread it in disbelief. My fence hadn't encroached on her land. Her pool had encroached on mine. The discovery hit like thunder. Every threat, every fine, every smug inspection, all from someone whose backyard paradise wasn't even legally hers. My first instinct was to storm over and confront her, but I held back. This wasn't the kind of victory you shouted about. It was one you calculated. Karen had wanted a boundary war. Now she was going to get one, and this time, the evidence was on my side. News spreads fast in neighborhoods like Willow Creek, especially when Karen Aldridge is involved. By the time the surveyor's findings reached my inbox, whispers were already rippling through the cul-de-sac. People had seen the stakes Reed had left in the ground, the fluorescent orange markings cutting across property lines like battle scars. The neighborhood's queen bee was about to learn that her crown sat on borrowed land. The report was crystal clear. The coordinates were matched against county records, GPS verified, and legally valid. The dividing line between my property and Karen's home wasn't where her pool fence stood. It was several feet beyond it, running right through the deep end of her pool. Every inch of her pool deck, the cabana, and even part of her tool shed rested squarely within my boundary. It wasn't just a small mistake. It was a major encroachment, one that could cost her hundreds of thousands in reconstruction or legal settlement. I could feel the weight of poetic justice pressing in, but I also knew how this had to be handled. Karen had spent years building her reputation as the neighborhood enforcer. Taking her down wouldn't be a matter of shouting facts. It would require precision, patience, and the full force of the law she loved to wield against others. The following morning, I gathered my documents, my deed, the original property plat, and Reed's certified survey. I went down to the county records office to verify everything once more. The clerk confirmed it within minutes. The land was mine, all right, legally, historically, and beyond dispute. The clerk even chuckled softly when he noticed the name of the neighboring parcel owner. "Oh, this is going to sting someone," he muttered. By evening, I drafted a calm, formal letter addressed to Karen and the HOA board. I attached the survey and a copy of the county's verification. The letter stated, in measured words, that the HOA's prior accusations were unfounded, and that the survey had revealed significant encroachment of Karen's structures onto my private property. It requested that the HOA and Karen cease any further action regarding my fence until the matter of the encroachment was resolved through legal channels. I printed 3 copies, one for Karen, one for the HOA, and one for my records. When I slipped the envelope into her mailbox, I imagined the moment she'd read it. The look on her face. The way her composure would falter just slightly before the panic set in. That night, I sat on my porch, listening to the faint hum of her pool pump in the distance. It was almost surreal knowing that the soft splash of water I heard every night was happening on my land. The arrogance of her letters, the harassment, the smug inspections. All of it now felt hollow, fragile, ready to collapse. The next morning, Karen's reaction was predictable and spectacular. She stormed out of her house in that same red blazer, clutching my letter as if it were a personal attack. She paced along the fence line, her phone glued to her ear. From my porch, I could hear fragments of her raised voice, words like nonsense, lawyer, and defamation. She was unraveling. But she still didn't understand the gravity of what had just happened. Later that week, I received an official notice from the HOA declaring my complaint unsubstantiated. According to them, the HOA does not interfere in disputes between neighbors unless community property is affected. In other words, they were washing their hands of the issue. That was fine by me, because this was no longer an HOA matter. It was now a legal one. I met with a real estate attorney named Mark Whitfield, a calm, methodical man who had handled boundary disputes before. When he read the survey, his eyes widened slightly. "This isn't just an encroachment," he said. "This is a full-scale trespass. You could technically demand removal of the pool or compensation for use of your land." He smiled faintly. Either way, she's in serious trouble. We discussed options, litigation, mediation, or an official claim of ownership damages. Mark recommended sending a notice of encroachment, a formal legal warning requiring Karen to either remove her structures or pay for continued use of my land. I agreed, and within 48 hours, the notice was delivered. It was a single-page document written in legal precision, and it hit her mailbox like a thunderclap. From that point, the tone of the neighborhood shifted. Neighbors who had once smiled politely at Karen now avoided her entirely. They had seen the surveyor's stakes. They had overheard her shouting into her phone, demanding someone fix this mistake. But there was no mistake to fix, only the reality of her arrogance catching up with her. By the second week, the HOA meeting turned chaotic. Though I didn't attend, word spread that Karen had tried to frame me as a vindictive neighbor trying to destroy community harmony. But when one homeowner asked whether she had checked her own property records, her silence was deafening. The gossip spread faster than wildfire, and still, I remained quiet, calm, patient. The last thing I wanted was to appear emotional or vengeful. I let the document speak for me. Then came the visit. One late afternoon, a white SUV with the county's seal parked near her driveway. Two officials stepped out carrying clipboards. They spent an hour in her backyard, measuring, inspecting, and taking photographs. By sunset, they drove off, leaving Karen standing at her back fence, staring toward my house, her confidence visibly shaken. The next morning, the HOA's bulletin board, usually filled with announcements about lawn maintenance and garage sales, was plastered with a new notice. Property dispute under legal review. Residents advised to refrain from speculation. It was the most polite way of saying chaos had erupted. In the days that followed, Karen became a ghost of her former self. No more morning patrols. No more inspection rounds. Her friends stopped visiting. The bright blue pool that once shimmered with weekend laughter now sat quiet and unused. Her world had shrunk, and every inch of it reminded her that she no longer owned what she thought she did. Meanwhile, my attorney continued his work. County records were being updated, and if she didn't respond to the notice within 30 days, I'd have full grounds to pursue damages and an order of removal. Karen had wanted to play with rules and property lines. Now those same lines were closing in around her, drawn not by tape measures or HOA handbooks, but by the cold precision of law. The third week after the survey felt like the calm before a storm. The once lively cul-de-sac had fallen into an uneasy silence, as though the entire neighborhood was collectively holding its breath. Karen's house, once the epicenter of every weekend barbecue and HOA gathering, now stood quietly defiant, its bright white siding gleaming like a mask under tension. The only sound that occasionally drifted from her yard was the steady hum of the pool filter, a mechanical reminder of her growing problem. The notice of encroachment had set a countdown clock in motion. 30 days for Karen to respond, 30 days to either negotiate, remove the pool, or face court proceedings. My attorney Mark advised patience. Let her hang herself with her own pride, he had said during one of our meetings. It was sound advice. Every action Karen took or refused to take was digging her deeper. As the days ticked by, small shifts became noticeable. Her husband, once a constant fixture mowing the lawn and tending to their garden, was now rarely seen. Packages began piling up on their porch, and her immaculate flower beds started to brown. The facade of control was slipping. Yet despite all signs of defeat, Karen's pride wouldn't allow surrender. She tried to rally the HOA behind her, crafting elaborate stories about survey fraud and property theft. She hinted that I had bribed the surveyor, that I was manipulating the county, that it was all an elaborate ploy to dismantle community order. But the truth had already taken root among the residents. They had seen the official markers, the county's follow-up visits, and the silent confidence with which I carried myself. And for once, Karen's word didn't carry the weight it used to. A week later, The first sign of official escalation appeared. A certified letter taped to Karen's front door from the county zoning department. I didn't need to read it to know what it meant. The county had confirmed the encroachment. She now had a legal obligation to either remove the structures or negotiate a settlement. And since she'd refused all prior communication from my lawyer, her options were narrowing quickly. I watched from my porch that evening as she tore open the letter, scanned its contents, and dropped it to the ground. For a long moment, she stood frozen. Then, with mechanical precision, she picked it up and disappeared inside her house. The porch light flicked off minutes later. From that day forward, she no longer looked in my direction when she drove past. Her SUV would speed by without a wave, without acknowledgement. The silence between our properties became louder than any argument could have been. But I knew silence didn't mean surrender. Karen was scheming, she always was. And soon, her next move came. One Friday morning, I woke to the sound of construction equipment. When I looked outside, a small crew was setting up near the back corner of her yard. It looked like they were preparing to install a temporary privacy barrier, a towering screen of wooden planks positioned to block the view of the pool area from my side. I realized instantly what she was doing, trying to obscure the encroachment line before the county's next inspection. A desperate visual cover-up for a legal issue that couldn't be hidden. My attorney advised me not to interfere. "Let her waste the money," he said dryly. "It won't change the GPS coordinates or the court's decision." So I watched in quiet amusement as the workers toiled all morning, hammering panels and drilling posts that, ironically, now extended even further onto my property. By the next afternoon, the illusion was complete. A giant wooden wall blocking her pool from view. But walls can't conceal truth. When the county officials returned for re-inspection, they documented everything: the barrier, the unchanged pool line, and the failed attempt at compliance. The following week, Karen received a final notice of violation. Her encroachment was officially classified as unlawful occupation of private property. The HOA could no longer ignore the issue. Their next meeting was the most chaotic in years. Karen arrived late, visibly agitated, clutching a stack of papers, her defense. But the other board members, sensing the political fallout, had already begun distancing themselves. Her vice president didn't show. The treasurer resigned mid-meeting. One homeowner stood up and asked, "If she can't follow the rules, why should we?" The question hung heavy in the air. The meeting dissolved into murmurs, then silence. Karen's reign was over. The following morning, she filed a complaint against me with the county, claiming I was harassing her and weaponizing legal systems. The county dismissed it immediately. Every move she made was being recorded, logged, and invalidated by hard evidence. The law was not on her side, and she knew it. Behind the scenes, Mark filed the next phase, a formal claim for fair market rent compensation. Essentially, I was demanding that Karen pay monthly rent for occupying my land until the pool and deck were removed. It was a strategic move, a calm, lawful reminder that the clock was still ticking. The total rent value added up quickly, thousands per month backdated from the day I'd moved in. When Karen's lawyer finally reached out, his tone was subdued, almost pleading. He requested a discussion to resolve matters amicably. But Karen's pride sabotaged even that opportunity. She refused every offer that involved admitting fault or removing the pool. The standoff deepened. Legal fees mounted. Her once perfect image began to crack under public scrutiny. Rumors spread that she was dipping into HOA funds to pay for her attorney, a claim that would later be confirmed through leaked documents. Residents demanded an audit. Within weeks, a formal investigation into the HOA's finances was launched, uncovering years of mismanagement and personal expenses tied to Karen's name. It was poetic justice unfolding in real time. The same woman who had weaponized rules and paperwork against her neighbors was now being crushed beneath them. As for me, I stayed quiet. I didn't attend meetings. I didn't gloat. I simply maintained my property, mowed my lawn, and watched the slow dismantling of her empire. Every hammer Karen had once used to build her authority now echoed in reverse, each one dismantling the false walls she had built around herself. When the county's deadline for compliance arrived, Karen didn't act. Her pool remained untouched. That same week, a judge signed an enforcement order authorizing removal of the structures at her expense. If she didn't comply voluntarily, Karen had crossed too many lines, figuratively and literally, and now the law was ready to redraw them permanently. The fourth month of the dispute, Willow Creek no longer resembled the pristine, tightly managed neighborhood Karen had once ruled with her clipboard and condescending smile. Lawns were still trimmed and houses were still clean, but the spirit of control that hovered over everything had vanished. The air felt lighter, freer, though beneath that calm surface, a storm was quietly brewing for Karen Aldridge. The demolition order arrived at her doorstep on a bright Monday morning. The county's notice was short and merciless. She had 30 days to remove all structures encroaching on my property, or the county would step in to do it at her expense. It listed the pool, the decking, and the pump enclosure, all of which extended a full 10 feet beyond her boundary. The numbers were staggering. Demolition, removal, and land restoration were estimated at over $60,000. Add in the fines and back rent from my legal claim, and Karen faced potential financial ruin. The queen bee of Willow Creek had finally met her reckoning, but even now she refused to yield. Her pride became her poison. Instead of accepting the order, she tried to fight it, filing appeals, sending letters, and demanding clarification of property lines. She even hired her own surveyor to dispute the findings. But the results came back identical to mine. Every measurement, every coordinate, every inch of dirt agreed. The land she had claimed for years was never hers to begin with. The HOA board, once her loyal inner circle, officially voted to suspend her as president pending the financial audit. The vote passed unanimously. Her allies had either resigned or turned on her. Her reputation was in ashes, her authority gone. I often saw her in those days pacing her yard in silence. The woman who once strutted with confidence now moved like someone trapped in her own home. The pool, her symbol of status and perfection, sat untouched, covered with a blue tarp. The cabana was empty, the once bustling patio now collecting leaves. Each gust of wind scattered fragments of her carefully curated life. Meanwhile, the audit of HOA finances reached its boiling point. The county investigators uncovered over $18,000 in miscellaneous expenses billed to HOA accounts under Karen's name, things like catered events, designer patio furniture, even a luxury umbrella set matching her own. When the findings were presented at the emergency HOA meeting, her remaining credibility disintegrated. Homeowners demanded refunds, resignations, and new elections. Karen's husband didn't even attend. The meeting ended with a motion to refer the matter to law enforcement for review. From there, the gossip spread like wildfire. People began whispering not about her rules, but about her hypocrisy. The once feared enforcer of neighborhood perfection was now the subject of pity, disdain, and disbelief. Neighbors who once nodded respectfully now crossed the street to avoid her. The HOA's social media group, which she used to control, filled with posts mocking her downfall, screenshots of her old fines and messages paired with sarcastic captions. Karen's world was collapsing, brick by brick, and I hadn't needed to lift a finger beyond the truth. The county's deadline came and went. True to their word, they arrived one morning with trucks, contractors, and legal observers. I stood quietly at my kitchen window as the crew unloaded equipment. Karen came out of her house in tears, pleading with the workers, waving papers, demanding that they stop. But they couldn't. The law had spoken, and her protest meant nothing now. The sound of demolition echoed across the cul-de-sac. The first cracks of breaking concrete rang like distant thunder. Neighbors gathered at their windows, watching the spectacle in silence. Karen stood at the edge of her yard, arms crossed, trembling with fury and disbelief. I could almost see the exact moment it hit her, the realization that no amount of shouting, complaining, or threats could undo what was happening. By afternoon, the once pristine pool was nothing more than a pit of rubble and dust. The cabana followed, its roof collapsing under the pull of machinery. The privacy fence she had built to hide the truth came down last, each panel falling with the weight of poetic justice. When it was over, the workers filled the ground, leveled it, and laid a thin layer of fresh soil along the boundary line. My boundary line. For the first time in years, the property line stood clear, open and undeniable. A clean scar cutting across the manicured perfection of Willow Creek, reminding everyone what happens when pride goes unchecked. The following week, the county billed her for the full cost of demolition. The HOA removed her name from all official listings. The new board president, a soft-spoken retiree named Mrs. Fletcher, issued a community statement emphasizing honesty, cooperation, and neighborly respect. It was an indirect eulogy for Karen's era of control, but even stripped of power, Karen couldn't let go. She filed one final lawsuit claiming emotional distress, defamation, and loss of property value. Her argument was thin, her evidence thinner. Mark and I barely needed to prepare a defense. The documents spoke for themselves. The court dismissed the case in less than 10 minutes. Her last attempt at revenge dissolved into paperwork and silence. From that day forward, Karen rarely left her home. The pool was gone, the laughter gone, the attention gone. All that remained was the house, pristine on the outside, hollow within. She still walked her property lines occasionally, as though searching for something to control, but there was nothing left to measure, nothing left to claim. I kept my distance. My goal was never to destroy her, only to reclaim what was mine. Yet watching her unravel, I realized that people like Karen aren't ruined by others. They're ruined by their own reflection. Her downfall wasn't my doing. It was the consequence of years spent mistaking dominance for respect. Weeks later, the HOA hosted its first neighborhood barbecue under new leadership. For the first time, the event was genuinely pleasant. No rules about chair placement, no passive-aggressive remarks about lawn color. Laughter filled the air again. People smiled without looking over their shoulders. I stood near the new boundary marker, the line that had caused all the chaos. It was so ordinary, a small metal stake barely visible through the grass. And yet it represented something monumental, the end of an era of control, the beginning of a quiet peace. As the evening sun dipped behind the roofs of Willow Creek, I thought about how the simplest things, a fence, a line, a boundary, can reveal the deepest truths about people. And somewhere behind her darkened windows, Karen Aldridge was learning that same lesson, one empty backyard at a time. Chapter 5. The Court Orders the Truth. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation that morning. The long-standing feud between Mark and the HOA's self-proclaimed Queen Bee, Karen, had reached its boiling point. For weeks, the town had whispered about the case, a simple fence complaint that had somehow evolved into a property rights war involving a swimming pool, legal filings, and accusations of trespassing. Both parties entered the courthouse with their heads high, though for very different reasons. Karen strutted in with her lawyer, her posture radiating smug confidence. She had spent weeks boasting online and in the neighborhood chat groups about how she would teach that man a lesson for disrespecting HOA authority. To her, this was a final performance, a public stage where she expected applause for her victory. Mark, on the other hand, entered quietly with a calm sense of determination. His lawyer, a property specialist named Claire Benton, carried a thick binder of evidence, survey maps, title documents, and official county land records. The judge presiding over the case was an older man known for his no-nonsense approach. He wasted no time. The courtroom settled into silence as he summarized the issue, a homeowner's dispute about boundary lines, HOA overreach, and potential encroachment involving a private pool. What might have seemed trivial to outsiders had become a serious matter of property law, one that could change ownership rights and even result in demolitions. Karen's attorney started with fiery energy, painting Mark as a defiant rule breaker who constantly undermined community standards. He highlighted photographs of the fence, the one she had claimed violated HOA design codes, and argued that Mark's disregard for regulations disrupted neighborhood harmony. He waved copies of HOA bylaws like they were scripture. Karen sat behind him, nodding eagerly with an expression that bordered on gloating. But when it was Claire's turn, the atmosphere shifted entirely. She walked to the projector and clicked through a series of maps on the screen. Each document bore official stamps, county records, certified surveys, and dated plats from nearly 2 decades ago. As she zoomed in, the boundary line between the two properties glowed clearly in red. It was impossible to deny. Karen's backyard, including her expensive pool, patio, and outdoor cabana, sat a full 12 feet into Mark's land. The courtroom murmured. The judge leaned forward. Karen's smirk began to falter. Claire continued, methodically presenting the timeline, how Mark's fence had been built precisely along the original property line, how HOA enforcement letters had ignored his legal evidence, and how Karen's violations were actually legal compliance. Each new document tightened the noose around Karen's defense. When the county surveyor was called to testify, the tension in the room thickened. He spoke with measured confidence, confirming the data as accurate. His team had verified coordinates with GPS precision, aligning everything with original deed measurements. There was no mistake. The pool, the patio, and a section of Karen's retaining wall were all squarely within Mark's land. The moment the judge processed this, his expression hardened. He turned to Karen's attorney and asked if there was any counter-survey or valid evidence to dispute these findings. The silence that followed spoke volumes. The attorney's face drained of color. Karen, sensing the narrative slipping away, began whispering furiously to her lawyer, but it was too late. The truth had been cemented in legal ink. When the judge delivered his initial remarks, they cut through the air like thunder. He condemned the HOA for overstepping its authority and for failing to validate claims before penalizing a homeowner. He noted that Mark had not only been falsely accused, but had also suffered from reputational harm due to HOA negligence. As for Karen, the words trespass and property encroachment echoed through the room. The legal implications were devastating. She now faced the possibility of fines, mandatory pool removal, and restitution for years of unauthorized land use. Karen's composure cracked. Her carefully built image of superiority collapsed under the weight of reality. Mark, however, remained still, not triumphant, not boastful, simply resolute. This was not revenge for him. It was justice. Years of quiet endurance had led to this moment, and he felt the satisfaction of truth doing what arguments never could. The judge adjourned the hearing with orders for a final decision within 2 weeks. But the damage had already been done. As Karen exited the courthouse, the reporters outside swarmed her. Her once perfect smile vanished as cameras captured her trying to cover her face. She had sought public validation and instead found public humiliation. Mark stepped outside soon after, flanked by his lawyer and a few supportive neighbors who had come to witness the outcome. For them, it wasn't just about land. It was about standing up to an abusive system that had treated homeowners like subjects under HOA tyranny. The victory wasn't official yet, but everyone sensed the tide had turned. That night, as Mark returned home, he walked past the same fence that had started it all. The early evening light cast long shadows across his yard, the crisp autumn air carrying a feeling of closure. Yet he knew it wasn't over. The court's final judgment was still to come, and Karen wasn't the type to surrender easily. She would try one more move, desperate, reckless, and doomed to fail. And when she did, Mark would be ready. The 2 weeks following the hearing were a quiet storm of speculation. The entire neighborhood buzzed with gossip. Social media pages lit up with debates, the HOA's credibility was questioned, and even Karen's closest allies began to distance themselves. Her once commanding presence, the woman who had dictated lawn colors and mailbox heights, had become a symbol of embarrassment. People whispered when she passed, and every glance at her backyard pool now felt like a reminder of her arrogance. Meanwhile, Mark kept his composure. He avoided confrontation, spoke to no reporters, and continued tending to his property like nothing had changed. But within his calm, there was a deep sense of vigilance. He knew that people like Karen didn't accept defeat gracefully. He was right. Just 3 days before the final court decision, Karen made one last desperate attempt. Late one night, floodlights flickered across Mark's property line. The sound of engines and hurried voices echoed in the dark. When Mark stepped outside, he saw a construction crew setting up barriers near the pool area. Karen stood there in her robe, barking orders, claiming she was fixing the encroachment before the court could twist the facts. It was chaos, a reckless attempt to rewrite legal reality before the judgment arrived. But Mark didn't intervene. He called the county sheriff's office instead. Within 20 minutes, deputies arrived and halted the work. They explained to Karen that tampering with disputed property under court review was a violation. Her reaction was explosive, tears, shouting, denial. Yet the deputies, calm and procedural, filed a report that would later seal her fate. Days later, the final court session commenced. The gallery was packed. This time, the HOA board members themselves sat in attendance, nervous and silent. The judge entered with a visible stack of documents, the final survey, property records, and the sheriff's report detailing Karen's unauthorized midnight construction. The courtroom felt heavier than before. When the judge began to speak, every word landed with precision. He outlined his findings. The fence was within legal boundaries. Karen's pool, cabana, and patio were indeed built 12 feet over the property line, and her recent attempt to alter the area during litigation had violated standing orders. The result was inevitable. The court ordered Karen to dismantle and remove all encroaching structures within 90 days. She was to cover the cost of restoration, reimburse Mark for legal fees, and compensate for years of unauthorized land use. The HOA, for its role in the ordeal, was fined and ordered to publicly retract its previous fines against Mark. Their authority, the judge emphasized, did not extend beyond verified property boundaries, and any further harassment would result in sanctions. Karen's expression was one of pure collapse. The fight, the pride, the control, gone. As the judgment was read aloud, she slumped in her seat, her lawyer silent beside her. For the first time, she seemed small, stripped of the self-importance that had defined her. The entire courtroom could feel it, the fall of someone who had built her world on dominance and deceit. Afterward, the neighborhood changed in quiet but profound ways. The HOA board members resigned, one after another. Homeowners began organizing a new community committee, one centered around cooperation instead of control. Mark, now regarded as the man who ended the reign, became something of a quiet legend, though he never sought attention. Weeks passed. One morning, the faint sound of demolition echoed through the neighborhood. Karen's pool was being torn out piece by piece. The sight drew a small crowd of curious onlookers, their expressions a mix of awe and relief. The once pristine backyard that had symbolized Karen's power was now a hollow pit, a physical reminder of her downfall. Mark watched from his porch, coffee in hand, his dog lying at his feet. There was no satisfaction in his expression, only a deep sense of peace. Justice had spoken not through revenge or fury, but through patience, truth, and time. By spring, the land had been fully restored. The fence stood untouched, weathered but strong, marking a line that had started a war and ended one too. Karen sold her house quietly and moved away. Rumors said she had lost much of her savings to legal costs and property repairs. The HOA dissolved completely within months, replaced by a simple neighborhood council that worked by mutual respect. For Mark, life returned to normal, or rather to something better than normal. The air felt lighter, the street friendlier. He spent his days fixing up his workshop, planting new trees along the fence line, and helping neighbors who once kept their distance. The story of the fence and the pool spread far beyond their neighborhood. It became a quiet legend across local news sites and online forums, a tale of arrogance undone by truth. For every homeowner who had ever felt bullied by an HOA or harassed by a power-hungry neighbor, Mark's story was a symbol of quiet resistance and ultimate vindication. As the sun dipped behind the newly restored yard, casting golden light over the property, Mark stood for a moment at the fence, the same place where it all began. The earth was calm again, And for the first time in years, the boundary line between neighbors didn't represent division, but balance. And that, folks, was the story of how a simple fence line exposed a web of arrogance, deceit, and power. And how one quiet man's patience brought it all crashing down. What began as a petty HOA complaint ended as a powerful lesson in truth. When Karen tried to control everyone around her, she forgot that control only lasts until someone stands their ground. The fence she mocked became the very line that defined her downfall. Mark didn't fight with anger. He fought with proof. And in the end, the law, the land, and time all stood on his side. His victory wasn't just legal, yes, it was moral. A reminder to every homeowner who's ever been bullied, fined, or falsely accused that standing firm in truth will always outlast tyranny. So next time someone threatens you with their authority, remember this story. Boundaries aren't just lines on the ground. They're symbols of respect, justice, and personal strength. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more real-life HOA revenge stories, where karma always finds its way home.